In the dusty heart of the Wild West, a terrified 19-year-old girl was pushed onto an auction block, sold for just $3. But when a lone cowboy raised his hand to bid, he wasn't buying a bride. He was saving a soul. She thought he'd chain her. She screamed when he knelt beside her, not knowing he was the only man who'd ever protect her. From fear to freedom, from danger to love, this is the story of the cowboy who rescued a broken girl, and the girl who healed a broken man. The wind of Dusty Hollow carried secrets the way a river carries silt. Quietly, steadily, and with a weight that settled deep into the bones of anyone who listened too closely. Folks said the land had a memory longer than any man's, and the sun, merciless bright, shined its truth over everything, even the things people wished to keep hidden. The midsummer heat clung to the wooden boards of the auction platform like stubborn spirits refusing to leave. It made the air shimmer, made moods meaner, made tempers sharp. Horses stamped irritably, men wiped sweat from their brows, and the town sheriff squinted at the horizon, muttering something about storms that weren't storms at all. Caleb Thorn stood near the back of the crowd, arms crossed, hat pulled low. He didn't care for auctions, nor the kind of desperate trouble that tended to come with them. But he'd been sent for supplies, flour, salt, lumber, and he wasn't about to justify wandering off from his errands. Until he heard the shouting. $3, last bid, $3. Caleb frowned. $3? What fool thing was so worthless it only fetched $3? But it wasn't a thing. It was a girl. A girl no more than 19, shoulders trembling beneath a simple calico dress, patched too many times to count. Blonde hair braided hastily down her back, dust sticking to her skin as though she had walked miles in fear. Her wrists bore rope marks, slight, but enough for a man like Caleb to notice. She stood on the raised platform not like someone being sold, but like someone being cornered, forced. The auctioneer's words felt unnatural, wrong, sickly sweet like something rotten left out too long. Caleb's jaw clenched. Human auctions had been outlawed in the territory years ago. He stared hard. This wasn't legal, couldn't be, but sometimes, in places like Dusty Hollow, law bent the way dead branches did, easily snapped when enough pressure was applied. "What's this?" Caleb muttered. A man beside him spit into the dust. "Orphan girl. Came through with a traveling wagon that got ambushed by bandits. They say she's got no kin. The men who found her say she owes 'em for her keep. Sheriff's letting it go 'cause she can't pay. Ain't right if you ask me, but no one listens to the likes of me." Caleb's blood turned to fire. Owe them for her keep? She barely looked like she had the strength to stand. And the sheriff, old Burdock, should have known better than to let such a thing happen. The auctioneer lifted his hand. Going once, going, and that was when she looked at him. The girl's eyes, wide and glistening, swept across the crowd in a panic. Most men looked away, some looked hungry, others bored. But when her gaze met Caleb's, steady, dark, unwavering, her breath caught. It wasn't a plea. It was terror. Something buried deep in Caleb, something he thought he'd long lost in the trenches of old fights and long nights, surged up like wildfire. Before his mind caught up, he spoke. $4, Caleb said, voice low but carrying. The crowd stirred. The auctioneer blinked, uncertain. "4? Do I hear?" "No, you don't," Caleb growled. "Hammer it." The man hesitated, but Caleb's reputation was not one to test. People of Dusty Hollow knew Caleb Thorn didn't raise his voice unless he meant it. "Sold! $4 to the cowboy." Caleb stepped forward, shoved the coins into the man's hands, and glared so coldly that even the dust underfoot seemed to still. Then the girl was handed down to him. She flinched when the auctioneer's assistant pushed her off the platform, but Caleb caught her elbow before she tripped. She jerked away with a frightened sound, half gasp, half sob, but didn't run. Probably knew she couldn't outrun the whole crowd. Caleb lowered his hat brim, shielding her from the stares. "Easy," he murmured, voice quiet enough only she could hear. "Ain't nobody touching you now." He wasn't sure she understood, but she nodded shakily. He walked her away from the auction block, past the wagons and shops, past the men who muttered or whistled under their breaths. His jaw tightened every time he heard a snicker or saw a lingering look, but he kept steady pace, guiding her toward his horse like she was something fragile he couldn't afford to break. When they were far enough from the cluster of people, he stopped. She stayed several feet from him, wringing her hands. She was trembling so hard he could see it. "What's your name?" he asked gently. She swallowed. "Lila. That all right if I call you that?" She nodded again. He studied her. "Lila, do you know why I bid?" Her throat bobbed. "To own me." "No," Caleb said, soft but firm. "To get you away from them. That's all." She blinked, confusion flickering through her eyes. "I didn't buy you. I bought your freedom." He tipped his hat back slightly. "You're not beholden to me. You're not beholden to anyone." Her breath hitched, as if she'd been holding on to a fear sharper than a blade. "No one's gonna hurt you," he added. "Not while you're with me." It was then, only then, that she broke. Tears welled up and spilled over, streaking down her dust-covered cheeks. She pressed a hand over her mouth, trying to hide the sobs, but her shoulders shook. Caleb stepped closer, but not too close. "Lila, it's all right." He didn't touch her, didn't dare, but his voice steadied like a warm fire in the dead of winter. "You're safe." Her knees buckled. Caleb moved instinctively, catching her by the elbows just before she collapsed. For a moment, she clung to him, not out of romance, not out of anything but pure human desperation. And that was when she screamed, not a scream of fear, but something raw, broken, like grief cracking open after being bottled up for too long. Caleb just held her steady, letting her cry, letting the storm pour out until she finally sagged against him, breathing in short, sharp bursts. After a long while, she whispered, "Why would you do that? You don't even know me." Caleb swallowed. "Reckon I don't need to know you to see you needed help. People don't do things like that," she murmured. "Maybe not," he said quietly, "but I ain't people." He helped her onto his horse, climbed up behind her, not touching more than necessary, and guided them toward the open plains, toward Thorn Ranch, hours away, toward a place where she could rest, where no one would dare sell her again. The Thorn Ranch didn't look like salvation, but to a woman who had run from nightmares, it might as well have been heaven. The main house was modest but well kept, with a broad porch and soft lights spilling from the kitchen windows. Chickens wandered lazily near the coop. The smell of hay and sun-warmed earth filled the air. Caleb dismounted, then helped Lila down with a quiet, "There you go." She tried to stand on her own but swayed. He steadied her gently. Inside, Caleb's sister Miriam Thorn turned from the stove and froze when she saw the trembling girl. "Lord above," Miriam whispered. "Caleb, what's happened?" Caleb explained everything briefly. Miriam listened, jaw tightening with each word. When he finished, she strode to Lila and wrapped her in a warm motherly embrace before the girl could flinch. "You poor thing," Miriam murmured. "You're home now. Don't you fret a second more." Lila burst into fresh tears, and Miriam held her until the tremors stopped. Caleb watched quietly from the doorway. Something stirred deep in his chest, something unfamiliar, warm, dangerous. He wasn't used to feeling things he couldn't control, but seeing Lila safe made something inside him unclench for the first time in years. Miriam settled Lila in the spare room, brought her broth and bread, and stroked her hair until exhaustion pulled the girl into a deep sleep. When Caleb passed the room later to check in, he paused. Lila slept curled on her side, one hand clutching the thin sheet. In sleep, she looked even younger, softer, vulnerable in a way that stirred something protective in him. Caleb pulled the door halfway closed. Then he leaned against the hallway wall and exhaled slowly into the quiet night. He hadn't meant to get involved. He certainly hadn't meant to care. But he did. And that was going to change everything. The days that followed were gentle, cautious things. Lila woke with nightmares, flinching at sudden noises. She ate little at first, unsure if she was allowed to. Miriam coaxed her with warm smiles and soft words. Caleb kept his distance, close enough to protect, far enough not to scare. He noticed the way she watched him sometimes, like she was trying to figure out whether he was real or just a dream wrapped in dust and daylight. He also noticed how easily he softened around her. It wasn't intentional. It wasn't anything he could explain. But when she smiled shyly at some small kindness, like when he brought her a blue ribbon Miriam no longer used, his heart thudded like he'd been kicked by a horse. Still, Caleb kept everything slow. Lila needed time, trust, safety, not romance. But hearts in the Wild West rarely listened to reason. One afternoon after a week at the ranch, Lila approached Caleb as he was repairing the barn fence. She held something in her hands, a small folded cloth bundle. "I made this," she said softly. He paused. "What's that?" "A lunch. Miriam taught me how to bake biscuits yesterday. I wanted to. Well, you've been so kind." Her cheeks reddened, and she held it out. Caleb hesitated, not because he didn't want it, but because he didn't want her feeling obligated. "You don't owe me anything, Lila, I know." She met his gaze, shy but steady. "That's why I wanted to." Caleb took the bundle gently. "Thank you." She smiled, a real smile, small and warm as morning sunlight, and something tightened in his chest. They sat under an oak tree while he ate. She stayed beside him, hugging her knees, watching him in quiet curiosity. "Caleb?" she asked after a long silence. When you bought me, did you know I'd scream when you kneeled?" Caleb froze mid-bite. He looked at her. "When did I kneel?" "That first moment when you caught me." Her voice trembled slightly. "My legs gave out, and when you dropped to one knee to help me up, I thought you were going to chain me." Caleb's stomach twisted. "No," he said, voice thick. "Darling, no, I would never. I know that now." She tugged at a blade of grass. "But then, I was so scared. I screamed before I even understood why. It wasn't about you. It was about everything before you." Caleb lowered his gaze. "I ain't offended. Just sorry you ever had to be afraid like that." She looked at him then, really looked, and the softness in her eyes struck him harder than any bullet. "You're a good man, Caleb Thorn," she whispered. He swallowed. "Not always, but you were good to me." He had no answer for that, so he looked away, cheeks warming beneath the brim of his hat. After a moment, Lila leaned her shoulder lightly against his. It was barely a touch, barely pressure at all, but Caleb felt it like wildfire. He didn't move, didn't breathe. He just let her rest there, small and warm and brave, listening to the wind rustle through the trees. Weeks passed. Lila grew stronger. Her nightmares quieted. She learned to ride, to cook beside Miriam, to feed the chickens, to brush the horses. Caleb watched her transform from a frightened shadow into a girl with laughter in her voice and hope in her eyes. And every day, he tried not to fall harder. But he failed. He fell for her when she thanked the horse after dismounting. He fell for her when she laughed at Miriam's joke and covered her mouth like the sound was something precious she feared to let loose. He fell when she stood up to a ranch hand who teased her gently, her spine straight, gaze steady, no longer the trembling girl on an auction block. Still, Caleb kept his distance, until the night the bandits came. The shouting woke him first. Caleb was out of bed, boots half on, gun in hand before he'd fully shaken sleep. Miriam met him in the hall, eyes wide. "Caleb, there's riders." He pushed past her. "Where's Lila?" "In her room. I'll keep her safe." He nodded once, then barreled out the door. The bandits, 5 of them, rode hard across the open ground, guns flashing in the moonlight. Caleb recognized the lead rider, Cole Haskins, a man as mean as a rattler and twice as unpredictable. "What do you want, Haskins?" Caleb shouted, leveling his gun. Haskins sneered. We heard you got yourself a new girl, Thorn. Figured she ain't yours fair and square. Caleb's grip tightened. She's free, not from what she owes. She owes nothing. Well, Haskins drawled, we'll take her back anyhow. Caleb's heart hammered. You ain't getting 3 feet past that fence. Haskins grinned. Then let's dance. Gunfire erupted like thunder. Caleb dove behind a water trough, firing shot after shot. Wood splintered, horses shrieked. Miriam screamed from inside, shouting for Lila to stay down. A bullet grazed Caleb's arm. He hissed, but kept firing. One bandit fell, then another. Haskins cursed and spurred his horse forward. Get the girl! Caleb surged from cover, firing, rage burning hot and blinding. You won't touch her! He roared. A final shot rang out, not his. Haskins slumped in the saddle, then tumbled into the dust. Behind him on the porch, Lila stood, holding Miriam's rifle, shoulders shaking but posture steady. Caleb stared, breathless. Lila, he murmured. She lowered the rifle slowly, eyes wide with shock, but alive, fierce, determined. I wasn't going to let him take me, she whispered. Caleb strode to her, taking the rifle gently from her trembling hands. You saved us. No, she whispered, voice cracking. You saved me. First, I just did the same, without thinking, without pausing. Caleb cupped her face gently. Lila looked up at him, tears shining, breath trembling. Caleb, she whispered, voice soft as the wind. I'm not afraid anymore. He leaned his forehead against hers. And I ain't ever letting you be afraid again. Her hands came up, resting lightly on his chest. Do you want me here? Truly? With all I've got, he murmured. She breathed in sharply, hopeful, tender, overwhelmed. Then I want to stay. Caleb's voice was low, steady, reverent. Lila, I'm fallen for you. Her lips parted, eyes softening with something warm and deep. I already fell. Caleb kissed her then, slow, gentle, careful, like she was the most fragile miracle the West had ever given him. She melted into him, arms winding around his neck, heart beating against his chest. And in that moonlit moment, something shifted in the air. The girl he'd rescued, the man who saved her, 2 broken souls finding safety, not in chains, not in fear, but in each other. The Wild West was rough, wild, unforgiving, but sometimes it gave you exactly what you didn't know you were searching for. And Caleb knew, right then, with absolute certainty, he would love Lila until the dust took him, possibly longer.